Hey, welcome back for another episode of Subscription Radio. I'm your host, DJ Fish, aka Ben Fisher, aka CEO of Rodeo. With me, I have a special guest and friend, Mike Duboe, who's a partner at Greylock. But before that, he was the VP of Growth, head of growth of Stitch Fix. And so, what's interesting about Mike, and part of the reason I've been trying to get Mike on our show for a while is he was early on. I would say around the cart hook days or just post cart hook, Mike and I were talking about sales enablement around e-commerce, trends that were happening around DTC. And now that he's an investor, he thinks a lot about e-commerce and enablement in marketplaces, and is very familiar with the Shopify ecosystem as well as headless, which I know you've made some bets in. So, and I'd say in terms of just some of the highlights, did you lead Postscript's round? I know that's one of your earlier investments. Builder and Postscript are the two that really stand out to me.
Yeah. Happy to do, and great to chat. Always enjoy riffing with you, Ben, or I guess DJ Fish here. And I'm happy to chat about any of that stuff. To take a step back, most of my background actually prior to Greylock was kind of leading growth and user acquisition functions at different kind of consumer e-commerce companies. Stitch Fix was the most recent one, which was more kind of running the marketing budget, kind of doing at-scale performance marketing stuff. And prior to that was kind of doing more kind of product and community-oriented growth, company called Tilt, and some other stuff before that. But yeah, as you noted, at Greylock, where I've been the last 3.5 years, have mainly been investing around kind of commerce and marketplace, network businesses. So within commerce, I kind of split it into infrastructure enablement for D2C commerce, as well as B2B commerce, which is kind of separate. So B2B commerce, B2B marketplaces, including there's some examples around food and kind of grocery, Pepper and Vori. There's another one that's kind of the fair for Latin America called Inventa. Another one, raw materials, called Novi. So that's probably out of scope for today, but around kind of the D2C stuff. Yeah, Postscript, we led the Series B there, so I sat on the board there, as well as Builder. We led the seed and then the Series A, which is kind of extends beyond commerce, kind of a no-code headless page builder, as well as kind of a couple other ones, Tido, which is around kind of analytics, another one called Treat. So yeah, that's kind of the where I've been focused more recently at Greylock.
Got it. And I'm curious, I think, so you were at Stitch Fix, you left about 3.5 years ago. Was that right?
That's right. Yeah.
I'm curious, one of the observations I'd be curious is how has, we'll call it D2C and even growth, changed from in even the last 3 years? And granted, that type of business is different than a shelf stable CPG product. Yeah. But just talking back and even thinking back to your experience and some of the different plateaus that you guys were dealing with around growth at Stitch Fix, were there certain moments and certain sort of peaks and valleys that stand out to you that you either see with brands that you're talking to today? And in what ways have the dynamics completely changed because of maybe increased competition or more VC or whatnot? So I feel like Stitch Fix was fairly early in the game.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Stitch Fix was actually, I think of Stitch Fix less as a brand and more of kind of a new channel, new distribution channel for kind of other merchants, and really a new way of shopping. But yeah, we did kind of come up in kind of the earlier days of kind of when D2C commerce was becoming a thing, and so we kind of get grouped into that. And I do think, so there's kind of two different topics here. Is how has D2C evolved and how has the function of growth evolved? I think, on the growth piece, it's funny because even growth is a very loaded term. And I think that the head of growth role, the VP growth role, is very different depending on context. So actually a lot of my friends from Reforge, which is really a great program for product growth people, tend to focus more on kind of the product and kind of product-oriented principles around kind of growth, versus I think in D2C and e-commerce, really the main levers that you have are marketing channels. And so it tends to be more of a marketing function. I've kind of lived both. And I feel like there's a set of common principles that kind of like underpin both. But I feel like for most of the time, when we talk about growth in e-commerce, it's performance marketing, which by the way is part of the problem here in that
Right.
for a lot of these brands, you actually don't have too many mechanisms to grow other than kind of spending money on marketing. And, as we've learned, like the laws of gravity tend to kick in with scale, acquisition becomes more expensive over time. And so, it's just, these things tend to not compound, or it's harder to kind of grow them, exponentially versus like linearly. Right. And so
Yeah.
like that doesn't mean those are bad businesses. It just means that as a VC, I tend to look less at those kind of like brands. And I also think for brands, it's more important to think about kind of like operating with a constraint of like profitability kind of like, early on. Which kind of this gets into the Stitch Fix thing. That was always a constraint that we had. And that wasn't necessarily deliberate. And Katrina's the one to tell this story, not me. But, I think in the early days, famously, the company had a hard time raising money and had made the decision quite early on to kind of just optimize for profitability and predictability over growth. Part of the
Hmm.
reason why was because, we were actually holding inventory and so, the model, it was actually highly risky to be like growing too fast, or too slow, I guess, like, buying too much inventory, obviously has its implications, but actually, growing too fast, in terms of demand acquisition would mean that, customers would just be dealing with like really long wait times. That wouldn't be a good experience
Hmm.
for anyone. And so it was this interesting kind of, kind of dynamic where we had to build out a stronger engine around predictability and early on, partially because that was the core product, was kind of this personalization engine for e-commerce, but also like around like data science, around kind of just optimizing for like demand planning was like a
Hmm.
muscle that the company built very early on. So we actually didn't do anything on user acquisition until pretty late in the game. Like I joined 2016 as kind of the first person in house doing this stuff,
Hmm.
and I think partially it was because this was this novel model and we had a lot of influx of demand early on, but it was also because we ran like a really tight kind of like kind of machine on the retention piece. And this maybe ties to some of what you want to talk about on like subscriptions and kind of now like having that as a service for e-com merchants who actually want to think about turning existing customers into more recurring. I think there's more tools out there today than there were back then, but at Stitch Fix, this was definitely a core competency that we built out internally and part of the model. So,
Well, it's interesting because part of what you were talking about, right, what I heard you say was like currently what you mostly invest or what you think about is channels, right? And how one of the challenges with um, D2C is, a lot of it's focused around performance marketing. I think your investment in Postscript is a great example of a channel, right? Where like channels open up, whether it's TikTok or SMS or what have you, is that's oftentimes what brands are running around after is trying to figure out what's the new channel, or finding different channels, whether it's just a new app on the web or something like even direct mail, right? Like I haven't seen any D2C brands using direct mail, but I'm sure that 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 someone's trying it.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it's interesting. There's kind of like two levels of channels here. So like I think one, you asked a question that I didn't answer, which is like how's like D2C changed? And I do
mhm.
think like um I've held this point of view for some time, but I think it's now becoming more common. It's becoming more consensus that D2C is like more of a channel than it is a category. And if you're a brand
Mhm.
that gets started on
Right.
D2C over time, you should think about diversifying not just your marketing
Yep.
channels, but actually the channels through which you sell, including through other
Yep.
retailers, kind of wholesale, digital wholesale,
Mhm.
that type of stuff. And then there's the marketing channels around D2C and how do you actually continue to grow your D2C business. In both of those levels, like diversification is becoming more important. Um,
Mm.
just because of like we've seen what happens when you become too concentrated in any one channel, including both marketing or just kind of selling through D2C, and so or through Amazon or whatever it might be. So I do think you know, and yeah, and that has been a thesis behind some investments like Postscript, which is not just like, hey, this is a marketing channel, but actually like we believe that SMS is a channel by which brands are going to do commerce as well, and
Hmm.
kind of view SMS as a platform, and and so and then I've not nothing we could share, but like the pipes to actually help brands sell through other retailers um,
Hmm.
and basically wholesale enablement I think is another interesting category right now. And I would say one thing we're seeing is brands kind of considering that channel sooner than they otherwise might have. Uh, Now that you have like in the past you used to not be able to get much analytics on who you actually sold through if you were kind of selling through like a third party, and now
Yep.
I think that's starting to change. So
Got it. So just to clarify, like if you're I'm talking about like maybe this is not the perfect example, but if you were selling wholesale through Walmart, you might get more. And maybe Walmart's a horrible example, but like basically, if you're selling wholesale, you'd be getting more analytics into the end consumer, or is it more that if you're selling through a marketplace like something like Fair, you'd be getting more information about your end consumer?
I'm referring to both, and I don't
Mm,
think it's like perfect fidelity there yet. But I think
yeah.
relative to 5 years ago, I think there's more of an emphasis on behalf of like brands are demanding that in building kind of the mechanisms by which you could actually like have a good kind of I guess like omni-channel customer view. And I think that I think closing that loop is like very important to helping brands actually have a diverse set of channels. So, and I think Fair, like at Fair is a business I respect immensely.
Hmm.
I know the team there well, and I think this has been part of their kind of like vision since very early on. So,
Yeah. No, I mean it's interesting. I think. So what are you paying attention to most these days? Because I know you've also gone down into Web3, and there are some ways to tie in conversations around D2C into Web3, whether it's like was it the Breakfast Club,
yeah,
like the Board Yacht Club or whatever.
yeah,
I am curious because I think, as I recall, at least we've had some conversations like, um, Solano is one of the like the blockchain projects that people are building on. Like, where's your head at these days, especially when you're thinking of commerce? Like you talked about like SMS, but then also even since you have been this cursory interest around Web3, is that
yeah.
something that even right now, in we'll call it the chilly, it's not even winter yet. Who knows what
It's
season
winter.
it is?
Yeah,
No one
there's
knows.
definitely a crypto winter happening. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, we've made some pretty significant investments around different parts of kind of crypto. For me
Hmm.
personally, like I am interested in the intersection of kind of commerce and crypto,
Yeah.
and that's kind of manifested around investments in, like NFTs and NFT infrastructure, which I do
Hmm.
think is kind of like you know, maybe misunderstood as like or oversimplified into like high priced JPEGs, which
Hmm.
there is some of that. Like, and I think that's kind of been like I don't know, tip of the iceberg on how kind of people could uh, understand like kind of just some of what types of commerce NFTs enable. I'm personally less interested in, when you talk about brands getting involved in this stuff, there's one angle
Yeah.
which is like, hey, you could sell new digital SKUs
Hmm.
alongside, like, Gucci selling digital purses, limited edition bags alongside your physical bags. Like that's interesting to some people. I'm not personally as interested in kind of like that angle. What I do think is becoming more interesting is, you know, um, and actually, I would put a plug in for Alex Danko at Shopify, who's doing a lot of this stuff there. He's talked a bit about kind of token gated commerce recently, and about how,
Hmm.
if you have like wallet aware commerce, if you actually
Hmm.
as a brand, if you have a view into what is in a customer's wallet, then in wallet meaning like crypto wallet, MetaMask, whatever it might
Yep.
be, Shopify
Yep.
native wallet, I don't know. Then you actually can provide a different customer experience to that person based on what they're holding. And so, like, I think, so that's kind of like one angle, which I think like a lot of e-commerce brands are starting to think about. There's another, which is like, and this ties into the topic here, which is like subscription, loyalty, things like
Hmm.
that. I am seeing a lot of it's starting with artists and musicians, kind of using NFTs as essentially like kind of membership passes,
Right.
and different ways for artists to actually assess kind of like who are your super fans, and providing kind of like differentiated experiences to people based on different NFTs that they hold. And for a consumer, like, it is liquid. Like, you could go and sell that if you're not getting the, if you feel like the value is appreciated, or if like, you're not getting what you want out of that anymore. But I do think
Hmm.
it's, I do think that's like kind of another angle that brands are starting to think about, which is like, how can I actually, how could I both serve my super fans and kind of build like a more loyal kind of community using this. And I think that's more interesting personally than kind of like, having other digital asset like SKUs live alongside my physical catalog. So
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting you bring up membership because I think in a lot of ways, like the least interesting part around, we'll call it subscriptions, is the subscription business model.
yeah,
I think one thing that I've harped on and I've told you about is like subscription. Like, if we were to say like the job to be done, most consumers don't actually care about a subscription. What they want is the product when they want it, when they need it, when it's
yeah,
convenient. Um, Brands want recurring revenue, uh, largely due to the hope around like valuations. Obviously, there's a lot of power in compounded
yeah,
recurring revenue. But I think where it gets crazy is that, like, now that we're having like a million brands offering subscriptions, it's like, how many $50 AOV like high premium juices do you actually need delivered to your home in parallel, right? And so, sort of looking at it from this perspective of, and there was like an interesting book I'd read where they, I forget the author's name, but I think it was The Membership Economy, where she basically was talking about how subscriptions are a subset, or are a business model within membership, and membership is the
yeah,
parent, right? And so thinking about, and I do think that NFTs or whatever can tie a piece into all of this, which
yeah,
is, I don't know necessarily where that clear delineation is. I know like there's Inveterate, which I don't know if you've probably heard about them at this point, where they're focusing on being a membership platform only,
mm,
like membership only platform for Shopify,
mm,
um, which is weird. Where like, whereas with what we're doing, we actually have a membership piece. What we do is, with Rodeo, there are products you can only get as a member, and
yeah,
those products rotate, versus a traditional subscription where it's like the benefit is you get 20% off and this product automatically shipped to you. Um, I don't know. I've been thinking a lot, and I'm just curious, like, your take on around how consumer behavior, and like this
yeah.
goes back to like Web3. It's like, what is it that people are valuing? And I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
one of the things here that one of the issues one of the issues I've had with subscription, and I feel like Stitch Fix, despite getting bucket like Katrina did not like call it a subscription company, because the reality
Right.
is like, you could have manual, you could opt people into the cadence that, and we got more sophisticated with this over time, to opt people into the cadence that we thought they wanted, because the best way to actually lose a customer is to actually send them stuff too fast so they burn out, right? Like, even if that
Totally.
might be
Pile up.
the that might optimize for like 1 year LTV, but probably not
Hmm.
5 year, which is kind of what we wanted to like think longer term. And that was a key part of our messaging, like when we were going public and all of that. But I think that carries over to what a lot of Shopify brands are thinking about nowadays, which is like, you know, it's it is tempting to want to opt people into subscription for categories that really might not need one. And if I think
Yeah.
about like, you want to provide customers with optionality, and want that, you want to reduce friction to people getting the product when they have an intent to, but you also don't want to like kind of force feed them. And I think
Yep.
too much of what I've seen kind of falls into the latter camp, because it's so tempting to see that near term revenue spike. And I think
Hmm.
it actually is a very short sighted approach. And so I don't like, there are some categories where I really value my subscription. So like, I'm a member of Trade Coffee. I think
Hmm.
like there's like seed symbiotics, athletic greens, like some of that stuff where I have a daily consumption habit around it. Makes sense. I don't want to have to think about ordering it. But then there's others where, and I actually think I give a plug for like, I don't think you would think it's a competitor. Like Repeat, we're not an investor or
Hmm.
anything, but I kind of like what they're doing, which is like, just making it easier for people to kind of like reorder at the cadence that they want to. And I think you're building out some stuff like this too, if I remember correctly. Um,
Yep.
so I think that's in my view, the right long-term play, even if it sacrifices some like near-term kind of like revenue bump. And I think merchants, brands have to think about like really look themselves in the mirror and say like, does this actually need a subscription? and
a
and
hundred
I think
percent.
for a lot of categories, the answer is probably no. So
Yeah, and I think because you remember like basically the business we built for Rodeo was One Click Pony,
yeah,
which a lot of, I mean, it was really just in time subscription where the whole
yeah,
point was driving repeat purchases. But at the time, Shopify didn't have a subscriptions API, so we couldn't even offer the subscriptions piece. And so with Rodeo, the idea was, yeah, like how do you marry those two where not everything should be a subscription and force feeding people just you're taking a loyal fan, someone who likes your product, and
yeah,
basically you're the pile up. You're making them feel taken advantage of. And when people have more and more choices, it's not a great way to run a business. I do think, and I'll tell you, like from a lot of the brands that I've spoken to, a lot of them are focused on 90-day payback periods, right?
yeah,
Like even brands I talk to where I talk about customer, consumer, or consumer customer centricity, right?
yeah,
I think a lot of brands would say, "Hey, yeah, we love to be consumer centric. We care a lot about our customer." But when you start talking about, well, would you offer a flexible subscription where the customer has more control over the cadence and the interval? That's where things you kind of start to see people I don't want to say you start seeing behind. It's basically when you
yeah,
force people to make a decision. They're like, yeah, at the end of the
yeah,
day, but I don't want someone for next. I don't want someone to buy quarterly. I want to get as much as I can over the first 90 days,
yeah,
um, because of the payback period. And the flip side there is maybe that works, or maybe that's just more of a mentality of early stage companies,
yeah,
because you're basically trying to get to the point of accumulating enough customers where you're like, we just need to prove the viability and grow, whereas Stitch Fix was in a different position. But it sounds like maybe it's more philosophical, where you guys, Katrina was more like we want to build a business really focused around like the lifetime value of a customer.
yeah, yeah. I mean, um, I think what's key is that you actually have enough margin so that you're
Mm,
not forcing yourself to do kind of the short term kind of like stuff. Because the reality is if like if there's existential risk to you not being able to like, get positive like economics in a matter of,
mm-hmm.
um, months, like that it can be problematic, and you run the risk of like sucking up a bunch of venture funding to get something that's really never going to get to like a real business. And you know so there's like first order profitability there's different ways of looking at this. But at Stitch Fix we basically knew, for us the key variable was keep rate. If we send someone 5 items, like there is um, uh, a number at which they need to keep for that order to be profitable. And
Mm-hmm.
we built a bunch of I mean, that was our core product, was a styling algorithm to actually make sure that people were happier with what they got. And it was keep rate was really the main metric we were trying to optimize. And if you have a keep rate of, call it 1 on like multiple orders, like that's not gonna close the gap. So that was kind of the nuance with like our business. The other point on like kind of that you were making around, I guess like delightful like end experiences to consumers. Like it made me think of, yeah, I mentioned Trade Coffee, but there's actually like
Mm-hmm.
I'm friends with the team at Fellow Coffee, and they actually, they make
Mm-hmm.
great kind of coffee gear, which you wouldn't need to subscribe to, but you should own this stuff. But I think like but as a subscription, they've kind of now built an experience where they source like different high end beans,
Right.
and it's different than Trade, where like you get a new roaster like every week. With them, I will get a text from them, and obviously I'm a big fan of SMS, but like I'll get it. They have
Mm-hmm.
my my credit card kind of stored, and I could just respond with, if I want 1, 2, 3, 4, or not respond at all, I won't get any bags. But whenever I get a text from
Mm-hmm.
them, basically like a semi-subscription where I'm subscribed to the text, but I don't
Yeah.
have to buy anything. And then,
Yep.
and I think they built that experience natively, but that's cool. And that's like some of the stuff we used to talk about at Pony. So
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I think there's it's that middle ground where um I think and especially it's ultimately it's like how do you make a great experience for a customer and like what you just said it's about um feeling in control and obviously also you like their product.
yeah,
But not feeling like you have to do a whole lot of work. And I would imagine a lot of it too is around communication, where you know that they're going to communicate with you ahead of anything, and also their business model is such that if you don't reply, nothing happens. They don't charge
yeah,
you.
yeah.
Um, which leads me to like, yeah, like, are there any other sort of brand experiences that you've had recently that positively or negatively you're like, holy crap, this is something to remember?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that was the main one that came into mind, but it could be because I just
Yeah.
really like coffee. I um, I haven't, you know, I was tempted to give an example on like the Sonos, like kind of the upgrade program, just because it was like, oh, that was effective on me. But then they like went back and lost my trust because like everything's back ordered there, which I know is not entirely their fault.
Mm.
But um, um, as far as like new kind of emerging brands, honestly, like, the coffee ones were the ones that kind of came to mind, and I think the trade one's pretty cool. But
Yeah.
I also like that as a channel. I'd be curious what you're seeing too, and what answers you're hearing here that are interesting. But yeah,
Yeah, I mean, trade is one of the better ones, and I've actually spoken to like their head of product. I spoke to, um, yeah, a bunch of the people who work there in parks. I was just really I appreciated the thoughtfulness that went into the design of their experience, and then like what were some of the things they would have done differently? Because they
yeah,
also built their own platform. They didn't use
yeah,
Shopify. They didn't use anything, and um, in terms of brand experiences that I've had recently that are great. I think most of the ones that stand out to me are the bad ones. Um, I think for a while I had a subscription plan to food where they would do my macros, and
mm,
this is like when I was getting ready to get married. They basically I would weigh myself once a week, and they would use get Grubhub's API to send me food that would basically match the macros to eventually reduce my weight to the point of what my goal weight was.
yeah,
And every week I would do a weigh in, and based off of my progress, they would adjust the meals. Because one of the unique things about franchises, if you're on like Grubhub or something, is you have access to calorie information on meals. And I think they had some of their own like machine learning, or we'll call it AI. I don't know.
yeah,
They basically probably had a bunch of if statements that tried
yeah,
to basically identify what foods were most likely like without a lot of sauces, so they could estimate portions and like calories. That was a magical experience. The customer experience uh, became too much, where they would send me food, but I had to give them like 48 or 72 hours notice if I didn't want them to send me a meal. And because I would like travel or have like a meeting or invite my wife out for dinner, what ended up
yeah.
happening is it was a really bad experience because I was wasting like half of the food. Um, so that, yeah, similar to what you talked about, it was like what started off as a great experience turned into a fairly just a really disappointing one.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, I mean, I like it's funny, like back in the day, I used to do like the X of the month club, like beer, wine, whatever.
uh-huh.
Um,
Yeah.
it feels like I'm not, I've only been gifted this, but like Table 22, I think was doing some interesting stuff where with
Mm-hmm.
basically helping restaurants kind of like launch new SKUs, and I could subscribe
Uh-huh.
to like, certain restaurants. Um, uh, that felt interesting and like unique as kind of like ancillary revenue line to kind of restaurants where I have like some brand loyalty, and getting to like take some of that stuff home. I also think, I mean, Goldbelly is not really, it's not a subscription thing, so it's probably not
Mm-hmm.
relevant. But I also think that's like in that vein. I think you could do a lot of interesting stuff with like food and kind of like tapping into something where I have some loyalty, but don't have like great access or like regular access to that at home. Um, So I think there's potential in those models, but I'm not sure about kind of durable, kind of like regular subscription there. So
Yeah, well, I think that there's just a lot of room for experimentation, and I'm excited to see. I know a lot of this is both enabled by like creativity of the brands as well as the tools and the people who are building.
yeah.
Hey, I know you have a hard stop, so before we end, one thing I always like to ask is like, do you have a big ask that you could put out into the world? Like, is there one thing that would change your life personally or professionally that if it were to happen would be like a huge transformation for you?
Oh,
Maybe it's a
geez.
new, maybe it's a biz dev deal, but I don't know.
No, I mean, yeah, the
But
real
that doesn't
answer is
have
I
to
just,
be.
yeah, I
Yeah,
have two
yeah,
kids at home. I need more sleep. But
yeah.
um, yeah, that aside, no, I mean, I think like in my job, it's a very, you know, uh, I love what I get to do, which is like learn from founders and kind of just, you know, try to be at the forefront of like interesting things that are happening. And so the reality is like the favor for anyone listening is like if you are you know, if you are building or have come across kind of like any experiences that kind of are shining some light into what the future of e-commerce could look like I would love to meet with those people. And so that's the shameless plug. But
Hmm.
that's all I got for you. So
Yeah. Well, hey, I mean that's good enough. And if people, I don't know if you're much of a Twitterer. I don't think I've really seen you do that many tweets. Like, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you or follow
yeah,
what you're
M
doing?
Duboe on Twitter. I'm not super active, and then just Mike at Greylock. So yeah, either of those
Yeah.
work. Yeah,
Cool.
cool.
And but you don't have like, yeah, I would say let's say like a podcast. I'm just
No,
imagining.
I do some
You have
stuff
your
on
kids
our
on it.
Greylock platform on Grey Matter. We've done some
That's
podcasts there,
right.
but yeah,
Yeah.
M Duboe at Twitter is the best way to get in touch. You just DM me there. So yeah,
Yeah.
cool.
Well, awesome, man. Well, thanks so much
Yep.
for coming on the show. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Always great chatting, Ben. See ya.
All right, buddy. Take care.
Bye.